The winter wind cut through Clara Pemberton's thin coat like 1,000 knives as she watched the last wagon disappear over the white horizon. And she realized with absolute certainty that she was going to die alone in this frozen wasteland. She fell to her knees in the snow, the fever that had plagued her for 3 days making her head swim and her vision blur at the edges. The wagon train had left her behind with nothing but a thin blanket and a canteen of water, the wagon master claiming they could not risk the health of the other families for one sick woman traveling alone. She had begged them to reconsider, promised she would recover, but fear had made them cruel, and now she knelt in the deepening snow as the November wind howled across the Utah Territory like a living thing bent on destruction. Clara tried to stand, but her legs would not obey her commands. She had been traveling to California to meet her brother, the only family she had left after her parents had died of cholera 2 years prior. She had saved every penny from her work as a seamstress in Philadelphia, had carefully planned this journey west with such hope in her heart. Now that hope felt like a distant memory, something that belonged to a different woman in a different life. The fever made her thoughts swim and tangle together. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and tried to remember how to pray. The snow fell harder now, thick flakes that stuck to her dark hair and eyelashes. She could feel the cold seeping into her bones, making her drowsy despite her desperate attempts to stay alert. She knew that falling asleep in weather like this meant never waking up again. Clara forced her eyes open wide and tried to focus on the landscape around her. Nothing but white emptiness stretching in every direction, broken only by the occasional dark shape of a juniper tree or rocky outcropping. She had never felt so alone in her entire life. She did not know how long she knelt there in the snow. Time seemed to have lost all meaning, stretching and compressing in strange ways. The fever dreams began to take hold, and she saw her mother's face smiling at her, felt her father's hand on her shoulder. They were calling her home, telling her to rest, to stop fighting. Clara felt herself beginning to tip forward, her body no longer responding to her will. The sound of hoofbeats cut through the howling wind like a miracle. Clara tried to lift her head but managed only a small movement. Through her blurred vision, she saw a dark shape approaching, a man on horseback leading a pack mule. She tried to call out, but her voice emerged as nothing more than a weak whisper that the wind stole away immediately. Samuel Irving had been riding the high country checking his trap lines when he spotted the dark shape against the snow. At first, he thought it might be a wounded animal, but as he drew closer, his heart seized in his chest. A woman, kneeling in the snow, clearly on the verge of collapse. He urged his horse forward, dismounting before the animal had fully stopped. The woman's lips were blue, her skin pale as death itself, and when he touched her shoulder, she was burning up with fever despite the cold that surrounded them. "Madam, can you hear me?" Samuel asked, his voice urgent but gentle. He was a tall man of 26 years with dark hair and serious gray eyes, weathered from years working his ranch in the harsh Utah Territory. He had a reputation for being quiet and solitary, preferring the company of his horses and the open range to the social gatherings in Silver Reef, the mining town nearest to his property. But right now, all his focus was on the woman before him who looked more dead than alive. Clara managed to open her eyes and found herself looking into a face that seemed carved from granite, strong and steady. His eyes held concern, and she felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of fear that had been choking her. "The wagon train," she whispered. "They left me." Samuel's jaw tightened, anger flashing across his features. He had heard of such things happening, people abandoning the sick or weak when fear took hold, but seeing the evidence of such cruelty made his blood boil. He pushed the anger aside, knowing there would be time for that later. Right now, this woman needed help immediately, or she would not survive another hour in this weather. "I am getting you out of here," Samuel said firmly. He stripped off his heavy wool coat and wrapped it around her shoulders over the thin blanket she clutched. Then he lifted her into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing. Clara wanted to protest, to tell him she could walk, but her body betrayed her, and she found herself leaning into his warmth, her head resting against his solid chest. Samuel secured her on his horse, climbing up behind her and pulling her back against him to share his body heat. He wrapped his arms around her to hold the reins, creating a shelter for her against the worst of the wind. His ranch was a hard 2-hour ride from here in good weather, probably closer to 3 hours in this storm. He urged his horse forward, keeping one arm tight around the woman to make sure she did not slip from the saddle. As they rode, Samuel could feel the heat of her fever through their layers of clothing. She drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes muttering words he could not make out. He kept talking to her, trying to keep her alert, telling her about where they were going, promising her warmth and safety. He did not know if she heard him, but he kept talking anyway. The ride felt endless. The snow fell so thick at times that Samuel could barely see 10 feet ahead. He trusted his horse to find the way, grateful for the animal's steady nature and knowledge of the territory. The woman in his arms grew more still as time passed, and fear gripped Samuel's heart. He had seen death enough times to recognize its approach, and he pushed his horse faster despite the dangerous conditions. When the dark shape of his ranch house finally emerged from the white curtain of snow, Samuel felt relief flood through him. It was a sturdy structure of timber and stone, built to withstand the harsh winters of the Utah Territory. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating that the fire he had banked that morning still burned. He dismounted carefully, lifting the woman down with him, and carried her straight into the house. The interior was warm and simply furnished, everything neat and in its place. Samuel had built most of the furniture himself during the long winter evenings. He carried the woman to his bed, the only bed in the single-room cabin, and laid her down gently. Her skin was still pale, her breathing shallow. He needed to get her warm and get the fever down, or she would not survive the night. Samuel worked quickly, stoking the fire until it roared in the stone fireplace. He filled a basin with cool water from his supply and gathered clean cloths. He hesitated for only a moment before beginning to remove her wet clothing, knowing that modesty had no place when a life hung in the balance. He worked with efficiency and respect, replacing her sodden dress with one of his clean shirts and covering her with several thick blankets. For the next several hours, Samuel sat beside the bed, carefully bathing her face and arms with cool water to bring down the fever. He coaxed water between her cracked lips a few drops at a time, knowing she needed fluids. The storm howled outside, rattling the shutters and piling snow against the walls, but inside, the fire kept the cabin warm and the lamplight pushed back the darkness. As night fell, Samuel found himself studying the woman's face. Even ravaged by fever and exhaustion, he could see that she was beautiful, with delicate features and dark hair that spread across his pillow like silk. But more than that, there was something about her that called to him, some quality he could not name. He found himself hoping desperately that she would survive, that he had found her in time. Around midnight, the fever finally broke. Clara's skin grew less hot to the touch, and her breathing deepened into something that resembled actual sleep rather than fevered unconsciousness. Samuel felt his shoulders sag with relief. She was not out of danger yet, but she had turned a corner. He added more wood to the fire and settled into his chair, determined to keep watch through the night. Clara woke slowly, her mind swimming up through layers of darkness toward consciousness. She was warm, wonderfully warm, and she lay on something soft. For a confused moment, she thought she was back in her boarding house in Philadelphia, that the entire journey west had been nothing but a terrible dream. Then memory came flooding back, the wagon train, the snow, the feeling of her life slipping away. And the man, the stranger who had appeared out of the storm like an answer to a prayer she had barely managed to form. She opened her eyes to find herself in an unfamiliar room. Log walls, a stone fireplace with a fire burning low, simple furniture that looked handmade. Morning light filtered through the shutters, bright and clean. She turned her head and saw him, the man who had saved her, asleep in a chair beside the bed. His head was tilted back, his face relaxed in sleep, and she could see the exhaustion etched into his features. Clara tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as the room spun around her. She made a small sound of distress, and instantly the man was awake on his feet, his hand on her shoulder steadying her. "Easy," Samuel said gently. "You have been very sick. You need to take it slow." Clara looked up at him into those serious gray eyes and felt something shift in her chest. "You saved my life," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. Samuel helped her settle back against the pillows he propped behind her. "I did what anyone would have done." "The wagon train did not do it," Clara said, bitterness creeping into her voice. "They left me to die because they were afraid of catching my fever." Samuel's expression darkened. "What is your name?" "Clara Pemberton. I was traveling to California to meet my brother. He has a farm there, outside Sacramento. I am the only family he has left, and he is the only family I have." She looked around the cabin again. "Where am I?" "My ranch, about 15 miles south of Silver Reef, Utah. I am Samuel Irving. I was checking my trap lines when I found you." He moved to the small stove in the corner. "You should eat something. I have some broth that should sit easy on your stomach." Clara watched him move around the cabin with quiet efficiency, ladling soup into a bowl and bringing it to her. His hands were large and work roughened but gentle as he helped her hold the bowl. The broth was simple but hot and nourishing, and Clara realized she could not remember the last time she had eaten. "How long have I been here?" she asked between careful sips. 2 days. Yesterday the fever was very bad. I was not sure you would make it through." Samuel sat back down in his chair, his eyes never leaving her face. "The storm is still blowing out there. Worst one I have seen in years. Even once it clears, it will be some time before the passes are safe enough to travel." Clara felt panic begin to rise in her chest. "My brother will be expecting me. The wagon train was supposed to arrive in California by the end of December. He will worry." "There is no way to get word to him right now," Samuel said practically. "The passes will be snowed in for weeks, maybe months. Come spring, we can get a letter to him. Let him know you are safe." The reality of her situation began to sink in. She was stranded here in this isolated cabin with a man she did not know. She had no money, no possessions except the clothes on her back, which she now realized were not even her own clothes but a man's shirt that hung nearly to her knees. She should feel afraid, should be worried about her reputation or her safety. But when she looked at Samuel Irving, at his steady, honest face, she felt only gratitude and a strange sense of security. "I do not know how to thank you," Clara said quietly. "You gave me your bed, your clothes, your time. I have nothing to offer in return." Samuel shook his head. "You do not owe me anything. I could not have left you there to die. No decent man could have." He stood and moved to add wood to the fire. "You need to rest and recover your strength. Everything else can wait." Over the next several days, Clara slowly regained her strength. Samuel cared for her with a quiet competence that both touched and amazed her. He made her simple, nourishing meals and never complained about sleeping on the hard floor in front of the fire. He changed the bedding and kept the cabin warm and never once made her feel like a burden, though she knew very well that she was disrupting his entire life. As she grew stronger, Clara began to observe her rescuer more carefully. Samuel was a man of few words, but she learned to read his moods in the set of his shoulders and the expressions that flickered across his face when he thought she was not watching. He worked constantly, always finding tasks that needed doing around the ranch despite the weather that kept them largely confined to the cabin. He carved wood by the fire in the evenings, his hands sure and steady as he shaped pieces into useful objects or small sculptures of animals. "Where did you learn to do that?" Clara asked one evening, watching him work on a carving of a horse. Samuel glanced up, surprised by the question. He was not used to having someone to talk to during the long winter evenings. "My father taught me when I was a boy. We lived in Missouri before we came west. He was a carpenter, made beautiful furniture. He always said that working with your hands helped quiet the mind." "Is he here in Utah with you?" Samuel's hand stilled on the carving. "He and my mother died of mountain fever 6 years ago, the first winter after we arrived. My younger sister Sarah passed the same year. I was 20, and suddenly I was alone with a half-built ranch and no idea what I was doing." Clara heard the pain in his voice, carefully controlled but still present. "I am sorry. I lost my parents to cholera 2 years ago. My brother Jacob moved west before they died. I stayed to care for them, and after they passed, I did not know what else to do but follow him. He is all I have left. And now you are stuck here with a stranger instead of with your family," Samuel said, a note of regret in his voice. "You are not a stranger anymore," Clara said quietly. "And you are the reason I am alive. Being stuck here does not seem like such a terrible fate." Samuel looked up, and their eyes met across the cabin. Something passed between them in that moment, some recognition or understanding that neither of them was quite ready to name. Samuel looked away first, returning his attention to his carving with an intensity that suggested he was using it to distract himself from thoughts he was not prepared to pursue. As the days passed and turned into weeks, Clara grew strong enough to move about the cabin. She refused to remain idle, insisting on helping with the cooking and cleaning despite Samuel's protests. It felt strange and intimate, the two of them sharing the small space, developing routines and rhythms together. Samuel would rise before dawn to tend the horses and check on his small herd of cattle that wintered in the sheltered valley below the cabin. Clara would have coffee ready when he returned, stamping snow from his boots and bringing the cold in with him. They talked more as Clara recovered, filling the long winter evenings with stories of their lives. Clara told him about her work as a seamstress, about the fine ladies of Philadelphia who would commission elaborate dresses and then complain about the cost. She told him about her childhood, about her mother teaching her to sew and her father reading to them from books in the evening. Samuel spoke less freely, but Clara learned to cherish the stories he did share. He told her about building the ranch, about the back-breaking work of clearing land and raising walls and digging wells. He spoke about his horses with obvious affection, describing each one's personality as if they were people. He told her about the beauty of the Utah Territory, the red rock canyons and the way the light painted the landscape in colors that seemed unreal. "You love it here," Clara observed one evening. They were sitting near the fire, Clara mending a tear in one of Samuel's shirts while he worked on his carving. "I do," Samuel admitted. "It is hard land, unforgiving if you make mistakes, but it is honest. You put in the work and the land gives back. There is no pretense, no society games or false pleasantries, Just you and the earth and what you can make of it together. You never get lonely? Clara asked. Silver Reef is 15 miles away. That is a long distance to travel just for conversation. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. I used to tell myself I preferred the solitude. After my family died, being around people felt wrong somehow. They wanted to offer sympathy or ask questions, and I just wanted to be left alone with my grief and my work. He looked up at her, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. But these past weeks, having you here, I have realized how much I have been lying to myself. I have been lonely for a long time. I just did not want to admit it. Clara felt her breath catch in her throat. There was something in the way he was looking at her, some vulnerability in his expression that made her heart beat faster. She had grown to care for Samuel Irving over these weeks together, had come to appreciate his steady presence and quiet kindness. But hearing him admit to loneliness, seeing the way his eyes lingered on her face, she realized that what she felt was deeper than gratitude or appreciation. She was falling in love with him, had been falling since the moment he lifted her from the snow and promised her safety. The winter deepened around them, but inside the cabin, something warm was growing. They began to touch more often, casual brushes of hands as they passed each other in the small space. Samuel's hand steadying Clara's elbow when she reached for something on a high shelf. These touches lingered longer than necessary, neither of them quite willing to break the contact. One evening in late December, Samuel came in from tending the animals to find Clara standing at the window, looking out at the snow-covered landscape. She wore a dress he had retrieved from her belongings that had been on the pack mule when he found her, and she had pinned her dark hair up in a style that reminded him of fine ladies in town. But there was nothing pretentious about Clara, nothing false. She had adapted to the harsh conditions of ranch life without complaint, had embraced the simplicity of their daily routine with a grace that amazed him. "It is beautiful," Clara said without turning around. "I never imagined snow could look so lovely. When the wagon train left me, all I could see was death in the white emptiness. But from here, from safety, I can see how the moonlight makes it sparkle like diamonds." Samuel came to stand beside her at the window. They were close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she had found among his supplies and used to wash her hair. "I used to see it that way too before my family died. That winter, the snow felt like an enemy, something that had helped take them from me. It took years before I could see the beauty in it again." Clara turned to look at him, and in the soft light from the fire and the moon, Samuel thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Without thinking, without planning, he reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her pins behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and he saw her eyes widen, her lips part slightly. "Clara," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I need to tell you something, and I am not good with words, so forgive me if I make a mess of it." "You can tell me anything," Clara whispered. "These weeks with you here, they have been the happiest I have had since before my family died. I know the circumstances that brought you here were terrible, and I know you have a life waiting for you in California with your brother. But I cannot let you leave come spring without telling you that I have come to care for you deeply. More than care for you. I am in love with you, Clara Pemberton. I think I have been since the moment I saw you kneeling in that snow, looking so fierce and brave even as you were dying." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Oh, Samuel, I love you too. I have been so afraid to say it, afraid you would think it was just gratitude or the forced closeness of our situation. But it is not. You are the finest man I have ever known. You are kind and strong and honest, and being here with you feels more like home than anywhere I have ever lived." Samuel cupped her face in both his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had begun to fall down her cheeks. Then stay, he said. Do not go to California. Stay here with me. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy, keeping you safe, loving you the way you deserve to be loved. Yes, Clara breathed. Yes, I will stay. I will stay and make a home with you. Samuel kissed her then, a tender, sweet kiss that held all the loneliness of his past and all the hope of their future. Clara wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, pouring all her love and gratitude and joy into that connection. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. "We should get married properly," Samuel said, "as soon as the pass is clear enough to get to Silver Reef. I want to do this right, want everyone to know you are my wife. I would marry you tomorrow if there was a preacher available," Clara said with a laugh. "But I can wait until spring. I am not going anywhere." They held each other close, swaying gently in front of the window as the moon painted silver patterns across the snow. Outside, the world was frozen and harsh, but inside, two lonely hearts had found their home in each other. The rest of the winter passed in a haze of happiness. Samuel and Clara spent their days working side by side, building a life together even before they could make it official. Clara proved to be resourceful and hardworking, adapting to ranch life with determination and creativity. She reorganized the cabin to make better use of the space, sewed curtains from fabric Samuel had stored away, and turned the simple bachelor quarters into something that felt like a real home. Samuel watched her transform his life with a sense of wonder. He had lived for so long in emotional isolation, telling himself he was content with his solitary existence. But Clara had shown him what he had been missing, what life could be when you had someone to share it with. He found himself smiling more, laughing at her observations about the chickens or her dramatic retellings of stories from her life in Philadelphia. They talked about their future during the long evenings by the fire. Samuel told her about his plans to expand the ranch, to build a larger house with separate rooms for children they both hoped to have someday. Clara shared her dreams of starting a small dressmaking business, serving the women of Silver Reef and the surrounding ranches who needed someone skilled with a needle. "You could build a small workshop," Clara said one evening, her head resting on Samuel's shoulder as they sat together on the bench he had built near the fire. "Nothing fancy, just a room with good light where I could work. Women will pay for quality seamstress work, even out here in the territory. Especially out here where skilled labor is hard to find. I will build you whatever you want," Samuel promised, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "A workshop, a bigger house, anything that makes you happy." "I just need you," Clara said softly. "Everything else is just details." As February arrived, the worst of the winter began to ease. The storms came less frequently, and the days grew gradually longer. Samuel started making plans for the trip to Silver Reef, calculating when the roads would be clear enough for travel. He was eager to marry Clara officially, to stand before a preacher and make vows that would bind them together in the eyes of God and the law. But there was one conversation they needed to have first, and Samuel had been avoiding it, afraid of the complications it might bring. One evening in late February, he finally broached the subject that had been weighing on his mind. "Clara, we need to talk about your brother." Clara looked up from the sewing in her lap. "Jacob, what about him? He will be expecting you come spring." "He will be worried, probably has been worried since the wagon train arrived without you. We need to send him word that you are safe, that you are staying here." Clara set down her sewing, her expression troubled. "I know. I have been thinking about it too. Jacob will be relieved to know I am alive, but he will also be hurt that I am not coming to him. We made plans, dreams about building a life near each other after being separated for so long." "You want to go to him?" Samuel asked, trying to keep his voice neutral even as fear gripped his heart. I would understand if you did. He is your family." "You are my family now," Clara said firmly. She reached for Samuel's hand, lacing her fingers through his. "But yes, I feel guilty about changing our plans without even consulting him. He sent me the money for the journey, worked hard to make it possible, and now I am choosing a different path." Samuel squeezed her hand. "Then we will go to him. Once we are married, once the weather is clear, we will make the journey to California. You can see your brother, explain everything in person, and he can see for himself that you are happy and well cared for. It will take time and money, but it is important. I do not want you to start our marriage with guilt or regret." Clara felt tears well up in her eyes. "You would do that for me? Travel all the way to California just so I can see my brother?" "I would do anything for you," Samuel said simply. "Jacob is important to you, which makes him important to me. Besides, I want to meet the man who is blessed enough to call you sister. I want to shake his hand and thank him for raising such an incredible woman." Clara threw her arms around Samuel's neck, holding him tight. "I love you so much. How did I get so lucky to have you find me in that snow?" "I am the lucky one," Samuel murmured into her hair. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara Pemberton. You brought light back into my life when I thought I would live in darkness forever." As March arrived, Samuel declared the roads clear enough for the journey to Silver Reef. They prepared carefully, packing supplies and loading the wagon Samuel used for trips to town. Clara was nervous and excited in equal measure. She had been isolated on the ranch for months, and the prospect of seeing other people, of getting married and starting her new life officially, filled her with anticipation. The journey to Silver Reef took most of a day, the wagon rolling over roads that were muddy from snowmelt but passable. Clara sat close to Samuel on the bench seat, her arm linked through his, marveling at the landscape that revealed itself as they traveled. The red rock formations glowed in the spring sunlight, and the valleys were beginning to show hints of green where the snow had melted away. Silver Reef had been a silver mining town since the discovery of ore in the sandstone back in 1875, and it had grown rapidly into a bustling community. As they approached, Clara could see the various buildings that made up the town, wooden structures and stone edifices housing everything from saloons to general stores to a newspaper office. The streets were busy with miners, ranchers, merchants, and families, all going about their business. Samuel guided the wagon to a stop in front of a neat white building with a sign that identified it as the home of Reverend Thomas Matthews. Samuel helped Clara down from the wagon, and together they walked up the steps to knock on the door. The Reverend was a kindly man in his 50s, with a gentle smile and shrewd eyes that seemed to take in everything about them in a single glance. Samuel explained their situation, leaving out the more dramatic details of how they had met, but making it clear that they wished to be married as soon as possible. Reverend Matthews listened carefully, then smiled. "I can see you two are devoted to each other. That is a fine foundation for a marriage. I can marry you tomorrow afternoon if that suits you. It will give you time to rest from your journey and make any necessary preparations." Samuel and Clara agreed readily, thanking the Reverend profusely. They found rooms at the hotel, separate rooms as propriety demanded now that they were in civilization, though Clara missed the closeness of the cabin already. They had dinner in the hotel restaurant, and Clara was amused by how uncomfortable Samuel looked in the formal setting, tugging at his collar and handling the fancy utensils with obvious distrust. "You look like you are sitting on a cactus," Clara whispered with a smile. "I feel like it," Samuel muttered. "Give me a campfire and a tin plate any day over this nonsense." Clara laughed, and the sound drew looks from some of the other diners. She realized she had been laughing a lot lately, something she had not done much of in the years since her parents died. Samuel had given her that gift, the ability to find joy again. The next day, Clara spent the morning at the general store, purchasing fabric for a new dress. The selection was limited compared to what she was used to in Philadelphia, but she found a lovely dove gray silk that would serve well for a wedding dress. The storekeeper's wife, a friendly woman named Mrs. Henderson, offered to help with the sewing when she learned what it was for. A wedding. "How wonderful!" Mrs. Henderson exclaimed. "And to Samuel Irving of all people. That man has been alone on that ranch for years, turning down every unmarried woman in the territory. You must be quite special to have caught his eye." Clara blushed but could not help smiling. "He is the special one. He saved my life, and then he gave me a reason to live it." With Mrs. Henderson's help, they managed to create a simple but elegant dress by early afternoon. Clara changed in the back room of the store, and when she emerged, Mrs. Henderson clapped her hands in delight. "You look beautiful, dear. Simply beautiful. Samuel Irving is a fortunate man." The wedding took place in the small church at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Samuel stood at the altar in his best clothes, his dark hair neatly combed, his expression serious but his eyes shining as he watched Clara walk down the aisle toward him. She carried a small bouquet of early spring wildflowers that Mrs. Henderson had gathered, and she had never felt more beautiful or more certain of anything in her life. The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Samuel's voice was steady as he made his vows, promising to love and cherish Clara for all the days of his life. Clara's voice wavered with emotion as she made her own promises, tears of joy streaming down her face. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her gently, reverently, as if she were something precious and fragile that he feared he might damage. Several townspeople had gathered for the ceremony, curious about the woman who had finally captured Samuel Irving's heart. They offered congratulations and well wishes, and Mrs. Henderson had even organized a small reception at her home with cake and coffee. Samuel endured the socializing with good grace, but Clara could see the relief in his eyes when they were finally able to escape back to the hotel. That night, they shared a room as husband and wife, and Samuel made love to Clara with a tenderness and passion that left her breathless and amazed. Afterwards, she lay in his arms, listening to his heartbeat, feeling more at peace than she had ever felt in her life. "I am home," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes, you are," Samuel agreed, his arms tightening around her. "You called me home." They stayed in Silver Reef for another 2 days, taking care of practical matters. Samuel purchased supplies for the ranch and for the upcoming journey to California. Clara sent a telegram to her brother, knowing it would reach Sacramento long before they could make the journey themselves. The message was simple: "I am alive and well, married to a good man named Samuel Irving. We will visit in late spring. All my love, Clara." The journey back to the ranch felt different now. They were no longer two people learning to live together, but husband and wife, partners in every sense of the word. Clara sat close to Samuel on the wagon seat, sometimes resting her head on his shoulder, and they talked about their plans for the future with excitement and hope. When they arrived back at the ranch, Samuel insisted on carrying Clara over the threshold of the cabin, making her laugh with delight. The small space felt even more like home now, transformed by their love and commitment into something sacred. Spring arrived in full force, bringing with it an explosion of work on the ranch. Samuel worked from dawn until dusk, plowing fields and mending fences and tending to the cattle that had survived the harsh winter. Clara worked beside him when she could, learning the rhythms of ranch life and discovering she had a talent for it. She started a garden, planting vegetables and herbs in the rich soil behind the cabin. She tended the chickens, Samuel kept and learned to milk the cow, and helped with the countless other tasks that kept a ranch running. In the evenings, they would sit together and plan the trip to California. They decided to leave in early June, after the spring planting was complete and the worst of the mountain snowmelt had passed. Samuel arranged for a neighbor, an older rancher named William Tucker who lived about 8 miles away, to check on the property while they were gone. As the departure date approached, Clara found herself growing nervous about seeing Jacob again. She had not seen her brother in more than 3 years, and she worried about how he would react to her news, to the changes in her life. Samuel sensed her anxiety and did his best to reassure her. "He will be happy for you," Samuel said one evening as they packed supplies for the journey. "He will see how much we love each other, and that will be enough." "I hope you are right," Clara said. "Jacob can be protective. He may not understand why I chose to stay in Utah instead of continuing on to him." "Then we will help him understand," Samuel said firmly. Together, they departed for California on a clear June morning, the wagon loaded with supplies and gifts for Jacob. The journey would take several weeks, following the route through Nevada and over the Sierra Nevada mountains into California. It was a challenging trip, but Samuel was an experienced traveler, and having Clara beside him made even the difficult days feel manageable. They traveled slowly, camping under the stars at night and making steady progress during the days. Clara was amazed by the changing landscape, from the red rocks and high desert of Utah to the vast emptiness of Nevada to the towering pines and granite peaks of the Sierras. Samuel proved to be an excellent guide and companion, keeping her safe and entertained with stories and observations. One evening, as they sat by their campfire under a sky filled with more stars than Clara had ever imagined existed, she turned to Samuel with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. Samuel immediately looked concerned. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right, actually. I am quite certain that I am with child." Samuel stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then a smile broke across his face, so wide and genuine that Clara felt her own smile answer it. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby." "Yes," Clara confirmed, laughing as Samuel pulled her into his arms and spun her around. "I am probably about 2 months along, I think. I wanted to be sure before I told you." Samuel set her down gently as if she might break. "This is incredible. This is the best news I have ever received. Well, second best, after you agreeing to marry me." They held each other close, watching the fire burn low, talking about the future and the child they would welcome into the world. Samuel was already making plans, talking about enlarging the cabin before winter, making sure Clara had everything she needed for the baby's arrival. They reached Sacramento in late June, finding the city bustling and growing rapidly with new arrivals seeking their fortunes in California. Following the directions from Clara's letters, they made their way to Jacob's farm, located about 10 miles outside the city. The farm was modest but well-maintained, with fields of vegetables and a small orchard of fruit trees. A simple farmhouse stood at the center of the property, and as their wagon approached, a man emerged from the barn. He was tall and dark-haired like Clara, with the same fine features and expressive eyes. "Jacob," Clara called, standing up in the wagon seat. Jacob Pemberton froze for a moment, as if he could not believe his eyes. Then he was running toward them, and Clara was climbing down from the wagon before it had fully stopped. Brother and sister met in the yard, holding each other tightly, both crying openly. "I thought you were dead," Jacob said, his voice choked with emotion. The wagon train arrived without you, and no one knew what had happened. I have been going out of my mind with worry." "I am so sorry," Clara said, pulling back to look at her brother's face. "I got sick and they left me behind. I would have died if Samuel had not found me." Jacob looked over at Samuel, who had climbed down from the wagon and was standing a respectful distance away, giving the siblings their reunion. Jacob released his sister and walked over to Samuel, extending his hand. "You saved my sister's life," Jacob said. "I can never repay that debt." Samuel shook his hand firmly. "You owe me nothing. Clara saved my life just as much as I saved hers. She brought joy and purpose back into my world when I thought I would spend the rest of my days alone." Jacob studied Samuel for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I received your telegram." "You married my sister." "I did," Samuel confirmed. "I love her more than anything in this world, and I promise you I will spend the rest of my life making sure she is happy and safe." Jacob looked between Samuel and Clara, seeing the way they looked at each other, the obvious love and devotion that connected them. His expression softened. "Then I am glad she found you. Welcome to the family, Samuel Irving." They spent 2 weeks at Jacob's farm, and it was a healing time for all of them. Clara and Jacob reconnected, filling in the gaps of the years they had been apart. Samuel and Jacob developed a friendship based on mutual respect and shared values, both being hardworking men who valued honesty and integrity above all else. Jacob was delighted when Clara told him about the baby, immediately beginning to make plans to visit them in Utah after the child was born. He showed them around Sacramento and introduced them to his neighbors, clearly proud of his sister and her husband. But as much as Clara enjoyed seeing her brother again and meeting his friends, she found herself missing the ranch, missing the quiet solitude and the life she and Samuel were building together. She realized that Utah had truly become her home, that the little cabin in the wilderness meant more to her than any city or town ever could. On their last evening at the farm, the three of them sat on Jacob's porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "You are happy," Jacob observed, looking at his sister. "Truly happy. I can see it in your eyes." "I am," Clara confirmed, reaching for Samuel's hand. "I know this was not the life we planned, but it is the life I was meant to live. Samuel is my home, and the ranch is where I belong." Jacob smiled. "Then that is all that matters. I am grateful to know you are loved and well cared for, and I am glad I will be an uncle soon." "You will have to come visit us," Samuel said. "The ranch is not fancy, but there is always room for family. Clara would love to have you stay with us." "I will come as soon as I can after the baby arrives," Jacob promised. "I want to meet my niece or nephew and see this ranch that has captured my sister's heart." They departed the next morning, the wagon loaded with gifts and supplies from Jacob. The journey back to Utah felt faster somehow, both of them eager to return to their life on the ranch. They talked about the baby constantly, suggesting names and making plans for the changes they would need to make to the cabin. They arrived home in early August to find everything in good order, William Tucker having kept his word about checking on the property. The ranch looked beautiful in the summer sunshine, the garden Clara had planted before they left flourishing in their absence. Samuel helped Clara down from the wagon and they stood together, looking at the cabin and the land stretching out around them. "Welcome home, Mrs. Irving," Samuel said softly. "It is good to be home, Mr. Irving," Clara replied with a smile. The rest of the summer and fall passed in a blur of activity. Samuel worked on enlarging the cabin, adding a separate bedroom and a small room that could serve as Clara's workshop. He built furniture for the baby, a beautiful cradle carved with horses and wildflowers, and a changing table and a rocking chair for Clara to use while nursing. Clara's belly grew round with their child, and Samuel treated her like she was made of glass, constantly worried about her doing too much work. Clara found his concern both touching and slightly frustrating, having to remind him regularly that pregnancy was not an illness, and she was perfectly capable of continuing with her daily tasks. In October, as the aspens turned gold on the mountain slopes and the first frost touched the garden, Clara felt the first contractions. Samuel immediately rode to fetch Mrs. Tucker, William's wife Martha, who had experience with childbirth. Martha arrived quickly, taking charge of the situation with calm efficiency while Samuel paced nervously outside. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Samuel could hear Clara crying out in pain, and each sound felt like a knife to his heart. He prayed desperately, promising God anything if Clara and the baby would be all right. Finally, as the sun rose over the mountains, he heard a different sound, the strong, healthy cry of a newborn baby. Martha opened the door, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy, and Clara is doing well. She is exhausted, but she came through it beautifully." Samuel rushed into the cabin to find Clara propped up in bed, looking pale and tired but radiantly happy. She held a bundle wrapped in soft blankets, and as Samuel approached, she pulled back the fabric to reveal a tiny red face with dark hair and eyes scrunched shut against the light. "Meet your son," Clara said softly. "Meet Simon Jacob Irving." Samuel sat carefully on the edge of the bed, staring at the tiny person in Clara's arms with absolute wonder. "He is perfect. You are both perfect." He looked up at Clara, tears streaming down his face. Thank you for this gift, for our son, for everything." Clara reached up with one hand to touch Samuel's face. "Thank you for finding me in that snow. Thank you for calling me home." Samuel leaned down and kissed her gently, carefully, mindful of all she had just been through. "I will love you forever, Clara Irving, you and our son forever." Baby Simon thrived from the start, a healthy, strong child with a healthy appetite and a surprisingly good temperament. Samuel was a devoted father, amazed by every tiny thing his son did. He would spend hours just watching Simon sleep, marveling at the perfection of his tiny hands and feet. Winter arrived again, but this time the snow did not seem threatening or lonely. The cabin was filled with warmth and love, and the sounds of a baby's cries and laughter. Clara had never been happier, watching Samuel with their son, seeing the way fatherhood had softened something in him, brought out a tenderness she had not known was there. Jacob arrived in March, making the difficult journey from California to meet his nephew. He stayed for 2 weeks, bonding with baby Simon and helping Samuel with projects around the ranch. Before he left, he extracted a promise that Clara and Samuel would visit him the following summer, bringing Simon so Jacob could watch him grow. The years that followed were full and rich. Samuel expanded the ranch, adding more cattle and building a larger barn. Clara started her dressmaking business, and word of her skills spread through the territory. Women would travel for miles to have her make their dresses, and she developed a reputation for quality work and fair prices. Simon grew into a bright, active toddler with his father's gray eyes and his mother's expressive face. In the summer of 1880, Clara gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Margaret after Samuel's lost sister and Clara's mother. 2 years later, another son arrived, named Thomas after the Reverend who had married them. The Irving family became well known in the region, respected for their hard work and integrity. Samuel served on the town council in Silver Reef for several years, and Clara became known for her charitable work, often sewing clothes for families in need and donating her time to help at the church. But for all the growth and success, the heart of their life remained the ranch, the home they had built together from nothing. On quiet evenings after the children were in bed, Samuel and Clara would sit on the porch he had built, looking out over the land they loved. "Do you ever think about that day I found you?" Samuel asked one evening. They were both in their 30s now, marked by time and work but still deeply in love. "I think about it often," Clara said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I think about how close I came to dying, how easily our lives could have never intersected. It terrifies me sometimes, thinking about how much I would have missed." "I was lost before you came," Samuel said quietly. "I did not even realize how lost I was. I thought I was content with my solitary life, but I was just hiding from the world, from my pain. You brought me back to life, Clara. You gave me a reason to hope again." "We saved each other," Clara said. "That is what love does. It finds you when you are lost and calls you home." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The sound of their children breathing peacefully in sleep drifted through the open window, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out its hunting song. Years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. Samuel's ranch prospered, becoming one of the most successful in the territory. Clara's dressmaking business thrived, and she even began training some of the younger women in the area, passing on her skills. Simon grew into a strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, while Sarah showed her mother's talent with needle and thread, and young Thomas had a gift with horses that amazed everyone. Jacob remained a constant presence in their lives, visiting every year and hosting them in California when they could make the journey. He eventually married a widow with 2 children of her own, and the extended family gatherings were loud and joyful affairs filled with love and laughter. Silver Reef saw its ups and downs, the silver mines eventually playing out and the town shrinking from its peak population, but the Irving Ranch remained steady, a constant in a changing world. Samuel and Clara became the elders of their community, the couple that everyone pointed to as an example of what love and partnership could create. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Samuel surprised Clara by taking her back to the spot where he had found her all those years ago. It was summer this time, and the place looked completely different, covered in wildflowers and green grass instead of snow. But Clara recognized it immediately, felt the ghost of that desperate, frozen moment when she had thought her life was ending. "I wanted to bring you here," Samuel said, "to the place where our story began. I wanted to stand here with you and look back at all we have built, all we have created from that terrible, miraculous day." Clara looked around, seeing the past and present layered over each other. "I was so afraid," she said softly. "I thought I was going to die alone and forgotten in the snow. I could not have imagined then that I was actually at the beginning of the most beautiful chapter of my life." Samuel took both her hands in his, looking into the eyes he had loved for 25 years. "You changed everything for me. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. After you, I was truly alive. You made me whole again, Clara. You made me better than I ever thought I could be." "And you gave me a home," Clara replied, tears streaming down her face. "Not just a place to live, but a true home filled with love and purpose and joy. You found me in the snow and called me home, and I have been grateful every single day since." They kissed there on that spot, the place where death had nearly claimed Clara, but where life and love had ultimately prevailed. When they finally pulled apart, they stood hand in hand, looking out over the land they both loved, thinking about the children and grandchildren that had become their legacy. As they grew older, Samuel and Clara settled into the comfortable rhythms of a long marriage. Their children had children of their own, and the ranch house was regularly filled with grandchildren running and playing and filling the air with laughter. Simon took over the day-to-day running of the ranch, allowing Samuel to slow down a bit, though he never fully retired, always finding work that needed doing. Clara continued sewing well into her 60s, her skilled hands creating beautiful garments even as arthritis began to make the work more difficult. She trained Sarah and several granddaughters in the craft, ensuring that the skills would continue in the family. She also wrote down the story of how she and Samuel met, wanting future generations to know the truth of their beginning, the miracle of their finding each other. One evening in their 70th year, Samuel and Clara sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. They were both white-haired now, their faces lined with age, their bodies slower than they once had been. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young man who had lifted a dying woman from the snow, and the young woman who had brought light back into a darkened life. "I would do it all again," Samuel said suddenly. "Every hard day, every struggle, every moment of worry or pain. I would do it all again exactly the same way if it meant I got to spend this life with you." Clara reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining automatically after so many years of practice. "As would I. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Samuel Irving. You saved my life in that snow, but you did so much more than that. You gave me a life worth living. You gave me home." "You called me home too," Samuel replied. "We called each other home." They sat together as the sun set, painting the Utah sky in shades of gold and crimson, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would echo through generations. The ranch spread out around them, testament to their hard work and dedication. The house behind them held their children and grandchildren, testament to their love. Clara rested her head on Samuel's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the same heart that had been beating for her for more than 50 years. She thought about the wagon train that had left her to die, about the fever that had nearly claimed her, about the miracle of Samuel appearing out of the storm. She thought about every day since then, the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and struggles, all of it woven together into a life she would not trade for anything. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Samuel replied. "Always and forever." They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, talking about their life, their family, their endless gratitude for the chance encounter that had brought them together. And when they finally went inside, they did so hand in hand, still calling each other home after all these years, still grateful for every moment they had together. The Irving Ranch continued to thrive long after Samuel and Clara passed peacefully, in their sleep, within days of each other in their 82nd year. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren continued to work the land and tell the story of the woman who was left in the snow and the cowboy who found her and called her home. It became a family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that love could be found in the most unlikely places, that kindness and courage could change the course of a life, that home was not a place but a person, and that two lonely souls could find each other even in the harshest of circumstances and build something beautiful together. The end of their story was really just the beginning of a legacy that would continue for generations, a legacy of love and partnership and calling each other home.